Hey everyone, I'm Zishushu and glad to have you back for another story. Let's jump right in. Today's tale comes from one of our readers, Jaja, and it happened back when she was in high school. Jaja's school had two kinds of dorm rooms, 4-person and 8-person. She was assigned to a 4-person dorm at the start of the semester, but when she moved in, there were only 3 girls living there. The other 2 were Xiaoxia and Xiaoxiang. Now Xiaoxia and Jaja had been classmates in junior high and were pretty close, so they naturally picked the same bunk bed, Xiaoxia on the top, Jaja on the bottom. Xiaoxiang had the lower bunk across from them. The 3 got along well. They kept regular routines, took care of their space, and chatted easily. Honestly, Jaja thought this arrangement was just fine. For about a month, the top bunk above Xiaoxiang stayed empty. Then, a new girl transferred into their class, a student from Qinghai named Xiaohuang. Word was, she'd stay for her junior year and then head back home for her senior year. When it came time to assign her a room, she ended up in Jaja's dorm, taking that last empty bunk above Xiaoxiang. Before Xiaohuang moved in, the teacher made a point of telling the other 3 to look after her. She was supposedly a bit shy. When Jaja and the others first met Xiaohuang, they totally got what the teacher meant. She seemed really quiet, almost painfully so. But after a while, Jaja realized shy didn't quite cover it. If anything, Xiaohuang wasn't just introverted. She was downright terrified of social situations. When Xiaohuang first moved in, the 3 other girls did their best to include her. After all, their teacher had specifically asked them to look out for her. Whether they were heading out to run errands or grabbing a meal at the cafeteria, they always invited Xiaohuang to join, but it soon became clear that Xiaohuang was actively avoiding them. If they called her to go eat, she'd say she was busy, but not long after. They'd spot her in the cafeteria anyway, clutching her lunchbox. She never ate with them, though she'd just get her food and leave. Even in the mornings, she'd wait until the other 3 had finished washing up before starting her own routine. At the time, the girls just chalked it up to extreme introversion. They didn't make a fuss or mention it to anyone. Months went by and nothing changed. Xiaohuang remained withdrawn. Unlike Xiaohuang, the other 3 girls were all locals, so every weekend they went home. But whenever they returned on Sunday evenings, they noticed a weird smell lingering in their dorm room. One weekend, as soon as they unlocked the door, they were hit by a stench, something like rotting food, mixed with the scent of burning incense. Jaja wanted to ask Xiaohuang about it, but she wasn't around. When Xiaoxiang arrived, the 3 of them tore the room apart, searching for the source of the smell, but found nothing. Later, on their way to dinner, the girls were still trying to puzzle it out. They figured Xiaohuang must have forgotten some leftovers somewhere, letting them go bad. As they chatted, a girl from the neighboring dorm, let's call her Blake, came running out of breath. Once she caught her breath, Blake asked, "What have you guys been up to these last 2 nights? I saw incense burning and someone was bowing on the floor." The 3 girls were stunned. It's just been Xiaohuang here. The rest of us went home for the weekend. They pressed Blake for details. Blake explained that she hadn't gone home that weekend. She'd been out with friends Friday night and got back around 9:30. As she passed under their dorm window, she saw a flickering light inside. Against the glass, she could make out several figures, and one of them seemed to be kneeling and bowing on the floor. Blake just assumed they were playing some kind of spooky game and didn't think much of it. But when she walked past their door, she heard strange, muffled chanting, like someone reciting prayers or scripture on television. The chanting was punctuated by the sound of someone knocking their head on the floor. Even outside the door, she caught a whiff of that weird mixed leftover food and burning incense. Now, Blake was usually pretty timid, but she had a thing for horror movies. So when those weird sounds and flickering lights came from Jaja's dorm, her imagination ran wild. She instantly pictured every creepy scene she'd ever watched. She was so freaked out that she didn't dare make a sound and just curled up under her covers, hoping whatever was happening next door would just go away. Blake's bed was right up against the wall she shared with Jaja's room. That night, the chanting and the rhythmic thuds never stopped. She couldn't tell if she'd actually slept at all. Even on Saturday night, the noises kept going. Only this time they were even louder. It wasn't until Sunday morning, when she heard the 3 girls getting ready to head out for breakfast, that she finally dared to grab her things and escape her dorm. After telling her story, Blake hurried off with her lunch tray, still looking shaken, and warned the girls to be careful. The 3 stood there in shock, struggling to process what they'd just heard. Who would have thought that just 2 days away from the dorm could lead to something this bizarre? That's when Xiaojiang spoke up. She'd kept this to herself because it felt too personal, but now she decided to share. She said that sometimes in the middle of the night, she'd hear strange noises from the bunk above. Xiao Huang seemed to twist and wriggle in her sleep, making soft, unsettling noises. Xiao Zhang had always figured it was none of her business and tried to ignore it. But on the Thursday night before this strange weekend, things got even weirder. As she was drifting off, Xiao Zhang heard the unmistakable sounds of eating and swallowing coming from the upper bunk. It was so distracting that she finally sat up, planning to tell Xiao Huang to quiet down. But the moment she moved, the noises stopped. Xiao Zhang figured maybe Xiao Huang realized she was disturbing her and decided to stop. So she lay back down, but as soon as she did, the chewing sounds started up again. This happened a few times, every time she sat up. Silence every time she lay down. The noises resumed. Fed up, Xiao Zhang finally got out of bed and pulled back the curtain around Xiao Huang's bunk just a little. What she saw made her blood run cold. Xiao Huang was lying there, eyes wide open, grinning at the empty air. The expression was so unnatural that Xiao Zhang could barely breathe. To her horror, it looked like Xiao Huang was somehow asleep with that creepy grin still frozen on her face. Xiao Zhang didn't dare wake her. She backed away, climbed back into bed, and pulled the covers over her head. Strangely, after that, the chewing noises stopped for the rest of the night. After lunch, the three girls sat on the school track field for a long time, trying to wrap their heads around everything that had happened. The biggest problem was, even if they told a teacher who would actually believe them, all they had was Blake's story, no real proof. So they decided to keep quiet for now and check on Xiao Huang themselves. After all, there were three of them. And as the old Chinese saying goes, the living have strong yang energy in traditional belief. This energy is what keeps ghosts and evil spirits at bay. They figured there was safety in numbers and decided to confront Xiao Huang directly and ask what was going on. When they got back to their dorm, Xiao Huang was already there, with the curtain around her bed drawn tight. The girls all gathered on Jiajia's bed, glancing nervously at each other, unsure how to even start this conversation. Xiao Zhang, still shaken by her experience from Thursday night, didn't dare go near Xiao Huang's bed. But Xiao Sha, who was braver than the rest, finally stood up. Without warning, she marched over and yanked open the curtain covering Xiao Huang's bunk. Inside, they saw Xiao Huang sitting cross-legged on her top bunk, eyes closed. But what made their blood run cold was the large, swollen bruise on her forehead, so dark it was nearly purple. Even though Xiao Sha had pulled the curtain aside with a loud whoosh, Xiao Huang didn't flinch. She just sat there, eyes shut, as if meditating, completely oblivious to the commotion around her. The sight of Xiao Huang meditating with that purple bruise on her forehead nearly sent Xiao Zhang over the edge. She was shaking so badly she could barely sit up straight. Jia wasn't as terrified, but even she felt a chill run down her spine. Swallowing hard, she quietly closed Xiao Huang's curtain again. That night, none of the three girls spoke a word. Xiao Zhang was too scared to sleep in her own bed. She squeezed in with Jia instead. As soon as they settled in, a familiar, unsettling sound began. Chewing, swallowing, and Xiao Huang's strange, low moans coming from across the room. Zhang shot upright, clutching the thin curtain that separated them from the rest of the dorm. Terrified that Xiao Huang might suddenly pull it aside, they soon realized that even Xiao Sha, usually the bravest, was trembling so hard on the top bunk that the whole bed shook. Then, to their horror, they heard Xiao Huang climb down from her bunk. Through the curtain, Jia saw her crouch under the bed, rummage for something, and then strike a lighter. Xiao Huang lit 3 sticks of incense, stuck them into something on the floor, and began bowing forcefully. So hard it sounded like she might break the tiles. Jia and Xiao Shang huddled together, eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down their faces. Even Xiao Sha couldn't hold back her sobs on the top bunk. After what felt like forever, the noises finally stopped. They heard Xiao Huang packing things away, pushing something under the bed, and climbing back onto her bunk. Once the dorm fell silent, Zhao sat above her and told Xiao Shang they had to leave. She said it out loud, hoping Xiao Sha would catch on. Xiao Sha shot out of bed almost instantly. The three of them scrambled up, grabbed their things, and ran for the door. But it was late, and the dorm building was locked. Not daring to go back inside, they sat on a bench in the hallway, completely rattled. They debated going to the dorm supervisor for help, but what could they even say? That their roommate was a ghost or possessed? What if Xiao Huang was just sick? Eventually, they decided to check the supervisor's room anyway, but it was empty. With nowhere else to go, they just sat there. Trying to collect themselves, Jia finally asked Xiao Sha what she'd seen to make her tremble and cry like that. Still wiping away tears, Xiao Sha explained that when she heard the eating noises, she'd quietly peeked out from behind her curtain. She didn't see anything unusual at first, but then her eyes drifted toward the space beneath the opposite bunk. There she saw a child crouched on the floor, staring straight at her. The child was chewing on something. holding Xiao Huang's lunchbox, and his face had a sickly bluish tinge. When their eyes met, the child grinned, a wide, unnatural smile, exactly like the one Xiao Jiang had seen on Xiao Huang before. That was the moment Xiao Xiao lost it completely. The moment Xiao Xiao saw the grinning child, she yanked her curtain shut and curled up in a ball, frozen with fear. She tried not to make a sound, praying Xiao Huang wouldn't notice her. Soon, she heard Xiao Huang climb down and start those terrifying, thunderous bows on the floor. While Xiao Huang was bowing, Xiao Xiao swore she felt a hand tugging at her own curtain. She was too scared to even breathe. After the bowing stopped, Xiao Xiao dared to crack her eyes open and peek out. What she saw made her blood run cold. 4 or 5 shadowy figures were standing around Xiao Huang, just silently watching her. Xiao Huang was crouched on the ground, packing up her things. That's when Jia called out that they should leave, and the girls made their escape. At first light, the moment the dorm doors were unlocked, the 3 of them rushed to their homeroom teacher and spilled out the whole story. The teacher wasted no time calling their parents, who came and took them home. The 3 girls stayed home for over a week, trying to recover from the shock. When they finally returned to school, Xiao Huang was gone. Their teacher assigned them to a new dorm room, far away from the old one. What happened next? They only heard secondhand from Blake next door. Blake said that on the night of the incident, she too heard the sounds coming from their dorm, as well as the 3 girls running out in the middle of the night. The next day at noon, their homeroom teacher, the dorm supervisor, and even a few male teachers and the boys' dorm supervisor all showed up at the dorm. The whole thing had clearly blown up. Curious students gathered around to see what was happening. Under Xiao Zhang's bunk, the teachers found 2 ceramic jars, one big and one small, and a little box. Inside the box were incense and candles. When they opened the large jar, the stench was overwhelming. Every teacher there started gagging. The jar was full of rotten, spoiled food. As soon as they opened the small jar, the teacher slammed the lid back on immediately, not even wanting to look inside. Xiao Huang was led away by the teachers, and after that, none of them ever saw her again. Until their second year of high school, none of them knew what was inside that little jar. It wasn't until the second semester, by chance, that they got to know another girl, Simone, who transferred in around the same time as Xiao Huang. When she heard about the strange things happening in the dorm with Xiao Huang, she didn't look surprised at all. Right then, she told them a story about Xiao Huang that explained why the school had chosen to bring her over. According to her, Xiao Huang's father was a drunkard. She'd never met her mother. The woman was gone before she was born. Back then, though the family was poor, Xiao Huang was a completely different person, cheerful, confident, and among the top students in her grade. But then, something terrible happened. When Xiao Huang was in 7th grade, her father, drunk out of his mind, assaulted her. She was just a kid, and this was the sort of thing you couldn't even talk about, especially since it was her own father. So she kept it to herself. The worst part was she got pregnant. As time passed, her belly started to show, and the rumors began to spread. Xiao Huang grew more and more withdrawn. For a long time, she stopped coming to school. People in her village said she gave birth to the child at home, but as soon as the baby was born, she strangled it with her own hands. When Xiao Huang finally returned to school, she was nothing like before. Silent, isolated, and always carrying that little jar. Wherever she went, the jar went too, and she never let anyone touch it. Once a girl with a reputation for causing trouble tried to open the jar, just to see what was inside. Xiao Huang picked up a kitchen knife from who knows where and chased her all over the school. After that, no one dared to mess with her. Later, the girls sharing her dorm room said they sometimes heard Xiao Huang get up in the middle of the night to burn incense and bow her head in prayer. The whole thing freaked them out so much that they begged their parents to let them transfer schools. Word spread quickly. Soon, nobody wanted to sit next to Xiao Huang in class, let alone share a room with her. The teachers felt sorry for her. They didn't have the heart to expel her. So when a chance to study elsewhere came up, they signed her up. That's how Xiao Huang ended up transferring to this school, with her little jar always at her side. Our last story for today comes from a reader named Fields and Wheat. This one happened to his granduncle, known as O Tian. Now, let's be clear. O Tian was always healthy, never sick, never the type to see ghosts or anything supernatural. But sometimes, when your luck runs low, they say you might just catch a glimpse of something from the other side. Another group who is said to be especially vulnerable are gamblers, those who lose everything at the tables. When your luck is all spent, your spirit gets weak, and that's when you might see things you shouldn't back in the day. O Tian ran a barbershop. Business was good. Back then, giving someone a perm cost 68 yuan, and the materials barely cost 20. His shop wasn't big, but after deducting expenses, he still made a tidy profit over 100,000 yuan a year, which was a lot more valuable back then than it is today. But then he picked up a bad habit, playing mahjong. For those who aren't familiar, mahjong is a classic Chinese tile game, a bit like poker in the West, but with its own rules and culture. Otian got so hooked, he'd leave his shop closed just to go play. There was a stretch of time when his luck was truly awful. He lost more than 100,000 yuan in just a couple of weeks. One day, he found himself in a mahjong parlor, completely broke. Desperate, he went to the owner to ask for a loan. The owner just shook his head and told him to go home, saying they didn't lend money, and besides, with luck like his, he should really take a break. But Otian wasn't having it. He got angry, thinking they were mocking him, and stormed off to find an ATM. Strangely, every ATM he tried was out of service. He must have walked to 5 or 6 different machines, but none worked. Exhausted, he sat on the roadside for a cigarette break before trying again. As he sat there, an armored cash truck drove by and stopped at a bank he'd never seen before. The sign looked familiar. Every character made sense, but somehow he couldn't pronounce the name. He thought, if the cash truck is here, this place must have money. Without a second thought, he hurried over. Here's a piece of advice. Never let desperation cloud your mind. Whoever heard of an armored truck restocking ATMs in the middle of the night? But Otian wasn't thinking straight. He just rushed in. The bank was packed with people trying to withdraw cash. He waited in line forever, but when it was finally his turn and he put in his card, entered the right PIN, and saw his balance, the machine just wouldn't give him any money. He tried over and over, but no luck. A man behind him said, "Buddy, your card won't work here. No way." Otian asked, "Isn't this just a regular ATM? Why wouldn't my card work?" The man just repeated, "Not here. Try somewhere else." Frustrated, Otian was about to give up when an older lady walked over and asked, trying to get some cash. He nodded, complaining that the machine wouldn't give him any money no matter what. The lady asked how much he needed. Surprised, Otian wondered if she was some kind of underground money changer, but he answered, 1,000 yuan. She reached into her pocket and handed him a thick wad of bills. "Consider this a loan," she said. "No interest, but you have to pay me back here tomorrow." Otian found it odd that a stranger would lend him money in the middle of the night, but he was in a hurry to get back to the game. So he agreed and took the cash. On his way back, he even grumbled to himself, thinking the lady must be crazy. Who lends 1,000 yuan to a stranger at midnight and doesn't worry about being paid back? Back at the mahjong parlor, he slapped his new cash down on the table. The others eyed him suspiciously. "Otian, where'd you get that money?" He told them about the old lady, who lent it to him outside. One of his friends picked up the stack of bills and threw it back in his face. "Take a good look at what you're playing with." Stunned, Otian bent down to pick up the money, only to watch in horror as the bills in his hand transformed from real yuan to ghost money. In China, ghost money is paper currency burned as an offering to the dead, believed to be spendable in the afterlife. At the time, the guys at Lao Tian's mahjong table were still bad-mouthing him as they headed out. With everyone gone, there was no point in continuing the game, so Lao Tian just went home. By the time he stepped out of the mahjong parlor, it was already starting to get light. He had a few coins left in his pocket, so he stopped by a roadside store for some breakfast. While he ate, he made his way back to where that ATM had been the night before. To his astonishment, the spot turned out to be an abandoned building, the ground littered with ash from burnt joss paper enough to leave him utterly dumbfounded. The next day, when it was time to pay the old lady back, Lao Tian completely forgot about it. All he could think about was going to play mahjong and gamble. A while later, he found himself at the same table again, only to lose even more this time. Midway through the game, a friend came over and invited him out for dinner. That evening, Lao Tian didn't drink at all. But after the meal, his stomach felt terribly uneasy. After parting ways with his buddy, he started walking back to the mahjong hall. His nausea grew unbearable, and right there on the street, he threw up everything he'd eaten earlier. Just as he was bent over, gasping and retching, he looked up, and there it was again, the bank from the night before. The old lady stood in the doorway, her voice sharp and accusing. "Young man," she said, "you promised you'd return my 1,000 yuan tomorrow. How could you forget?" Lao Tian was too busy, heaving to pay much attention, muttering, "I'll pay tomorrow." He managed to muddle through. The woman nodded, her tone firm. "It's a deal. If you don't come through, I'll track you down at your place." She spoke while he was still doubled over, spewing his guts out. When he finally straightened up, both she and the bank had vanished. In their place stood the same desolate, abandoned building as before. It hit him then. He'd crossed paths with something he should never have encountered. That night, Lao Tian didn't dare go home. Instead, he stayed at the mahjong parlor, sitting alone through the hours. Even when his fellow players called out to him to join in, he refused. The owner, thinking Lao Tian had finally seen the light, teased him good-naturedly. "So you've turned over a new leaf today, huh?" Taking the opening, Lao Tian slowly recounted the strange events of the previous night. The owner suggested he visit a shop that sells joss offerings and ask around for advice. As dawn broke, Lao Tian headed to a nearby store selling such items and walked straight to the counter. Without preamble, he declared, "I need 1,000 yuan worth of spirit money." The shopkeeper stared at him, baffled. "Why do you need so much? Are you planning to pass it off as real cash or something?" Lao Tian explained the whole story. The loan from the mysterious old lady after listening. The shopkeeper agreed wholeheartedly. "You're right. You've got to buy exactly 1,000, otherwise that woman will keep haunting you." Luckily, he added with a grin, "We happen to have just the right amount here. Not a single bill more, not a single bill less." With that, the shopkeeper offered to help. Late that night, when the streets were quiet, he loaded up a small 3-wheeled cart with a full 1,000 yuan's worth of spirit money and drove it over to the abandoned building. When Lao Tian saw it, he was stunned. The pile was enormous, every inch of the cart packed tight with bills. Terrified of drawing the cops' attention for suspected arson, he decided to burn them little by little instead of all at once. For hours that night, he sat there, watching the flames consume the paper until morning finally arrived. By then, his nose and ears were clogged with ash and his eyes were gritty with it too. After that, Lao Tian never set foot near that spot again. He even quit playing mahjong altogether. And that, folks, is all for today. Until next time, bye-bye.